Experience Officer for Baptist Memorial Healthcare. Before we get started, let's invite Chaplain Robert Schmall up here to offer a prayer.
Let's pray. Father, you are called by many names in Scripture, but tonight we call out to you as Jehovah Shalom, the Lord is peace. Our land needs your peace, Lord. Our city needs your peace. We thank you for all the men and women that work tirelessly to bring about an end to violence and to maintain that peace, Lord, and for all those who come rushing in the aftermath of violence to lend comfort and aid and healing. We ask your blessing on each of them. We thank you for Dr. Stavas and the ministry and mission that you've placed on her heart. We ask that you bless her, that you equip her and prosper her in that mission and ministry in accordance with your will, Lord. Your word tells us that we are to carry one another's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ, and that's the law of love. And so we pray, Lord, that you'll help us to be more genuinely loving towards others, Lord, that you'll help us to see the hurt and meet the need. I pray that you'll bless us and keep us, make your face shine upon us, be gracious to us, let your countenance rest on us, and give us your shalom, your peace, all the days of our life. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight for the City Current Signature Speaker Series reception. You know, we've partnered with City Current on these events for many years. And through this collaboration, we've had the opportunity to introduce profound individuals who have made a difference to the Mid-South. These speakers inspire and motivate both young and old to make changes to improve their own health and well-being and that of others. These guests truly make a difference, and Baptist is proud of the work that we've done with City Current over the years. This year's speaker is no different than many of the others. She's accomplished, she's smart, and she has a large presence. And I have to admit, I have a special connection with her, not only as a healthcare professional, but as an athlete or runner, even though I'm pretty sure that you could definitely outrun me. I truly believe anyone would be inspired by her bravery, her strength, and her compassion, and I can't wait to hear from her in this intimate setting. Before she comes up, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Allison Chase, CEO and Administrator of Baptist Memorial Hospital for Women and Spence and Becky Wilson's Baptist Children's Hospital. She is accomplished in her own right. Allison will introduce our speaker. I hope you enjoy the evening. Well, thank you so much, Christy, and we are thrilled to have you all here tonight to host this event with City Current. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Natalie Stavas. She is a true healthcare hero, a humanitarian, and award-winning physician. She serves as the Program Director for Child Protection Pediatrics at the University of California, San Diego, and specializes in work with vulnerable children, victims of abuse, and decreasing youth violence. On April 15th, 2013, Dr. Stavas' life was changed forever. As thousands gathered to celebrate Patriots' Day in Boston, 2 homemade bombs exploded near the finish line of the Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and injuring more than 260 others. Dr. Stavas was just blocks away, approaching the finish line of her 5th Boston Marathon. When she heard the blasts, she didn't run away. She ran toward the chaos. An avid runner, her philosophy for success is to run toward it. She attacks every obstacle with the same attitude. You run toward that which you fear, that which challenges you, that which is oppositional. Dr. Stavas has been honored by President Barack Obama, named one of Boston's best by Improper Bostonian magazine, and named the 2013 Bostonian of the Year by the Boston Globe. This award is given to Bostonians who affect their community in a remarkable way. She was featured on CNN, BBC, CBC, and Fox News. She has appeared on the cover of Runner's World magazine and Sports Illustrated. Please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, Dr. Natalie Stavas.
Oh, hello, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here. Can you hear me with this microphone? Is it projecting all the way to the back? Thank you so much for inviting me here. It is really such an honor, to be able to come, and I got to tour the beautiful hospital today and see your organization and just the amount of care and support that you all provide for this community is so profound. So I have a very short time with you guys today, and I know a lot of that time is actually geared towards asking questions and doing a Q&A session. But I wanted to share a little bit about myself, and I want to tell you a story. I think the human condition is fascinating, and stories that we share can enlighten, and they can really help us understand one another and bring unity and really show us that in the end, we are all more common than not, right? We all are more alike than disalike. So how do we come together, and how do we work together as teams, right, as systems, to really bring out the best in our community, to alleviate suffering and improve the human condition? So the abbreviated version of my story and how I got to you guys today. So I grew up in a very, very small farm town in Nebraska. The town that I grew up in had 400 people in it, so very, very small. And I loved my time growing up on the farm. But when I was young, I was very, 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 very hyper, and I was very, very active. Now, this was in the mid 80s. And what I have, my diagnosis, is actually attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. But in 1987, that did not exist in the medical language, right? ADHD didn't come out as a diagnosis until close to like 1989. So my parents were at a little bit of a loss for what to do with me. They had this very, very hyper 6-7-year-old who couldn't really focus and really had struggled actually to complete everyday normal tasks. But like any good parents do, they had chosen to experiment on me, their eldest child. I'm the oldest of 5, because they had made this observation about me. They had observed that when I was outside and when I was active and when I was engaging doing things on the farm, I could come in and I could focus a little bit better. So one day they sat me down and they had these pair of Keds shoes. There weren't running shoes for children back then. So they hand me these pair of Keds. And mind you, I'm like 6 years old. And they said, tonight before you do your homework, we want you to run around the block and burn off a little bit of energy. Who here knows how long a Nebraska block is? Anyone take a guess? It's 4 miles. It's 4 miles long, a Nebraska block. So this is what I started doing. And this is actually how I got into running. So I started running every night before I did my homework at age 6, 4 miles. Like, it's pretty remarkable, right? And listen, guys, this was the 80s. I do not think that parents would get away with that today. But this is where I began to develop my love for running and for understanding how being active can truly affect us, right, as a person. And it can change the way we problem solve and that we interact with the world around us. Who knows why in here? Anyone know why running and activity, what it does to our brain, what it releases in our brain that allows us to focus and be creative and put our energy into a task that we're supposed to do? It's dopamine. Yeah, it releases dopamine. We're going to come back to that in a second. So hold on to that word, dopamine, right? So our brain releases dopamine. I didn't know this for a really long time, that it was because it wasn't until I went to medical school that I realized that there was a biologic reason why after running and, this 4 miles around the block, I could actually excel and see a challenge and like want to do that challenge, right? Like I was excited about it. So anyway, this is how I got into running. So I ran all through high school, all through college, and I've run 26 marathons in my life. So I have really enjoyed running. And very interestingly, I started running a lot, and I would run 2 to 3 marathons a year into my teenage years. And something that's fascinating, and I don't know if the biologic reason behind this, but I actually never had to take any meds for my ADHD. I mean, I ran a lot. I ran a lot. Maybe I should have taken the meds, but, for me, it was running. So this is how I found myself running the Boston Marathon. So a little bit, 30 seconds more about my kind of history into medicine. I actually went to nursing school. I was a nurse for 6 years before I went to medical school. So I went to nursing school in Nebraska. I went to medical school in Nebraska. And another funny story actually about Nebraska and then going to residency. So in my 4th year of medical school, I decided that I wanted to go to Harvard. But I'd never left Nebraska, right, guys? I was a corn husker, and I decided I'm going to go to Harvard. So at the time when I was applying to pediatric residency, Harvard had the best pediatric training program in the country. It was like where you went if you wanted to study pediatric medicine and research. And to get into residency programs from medical school, you need letters of recommendation. And so one day I strolled into my medical advisor's office, I'm all confident and I'm strolling in, and I look at my medical advisor and I say, I'm going to go to Harvard for residency. I'm going to leave Nebraska. I need a letter of recommendation. And he said to me, why are you going to go to Harvard? You won't get in. They do not take people from Nebraska. He said, you will not get in. Why don't you try somewhere closer, like Kansas? And I was like, oh no, I am definitely not going to Kansas. It is just like Nebraska, which is totally fine. I love Kansas. It's great. But I was floored by that someone would say, because of where you're from, right? Because of where you've trained, you won't accomplish something. Right. And I know we've all experienced that, right? We're still experiencing it today, right? That is a unique thing to the human condition. I proved it wrong. And I was actually the first person from Nebraska ever to get accepted into Harvard's pediatric training program, which was quite the feat. Oh, thank you. And guys, they've taken 4 Nebraskans since me, right? They were like, yeah, those people from Nebraska, they're nice. They're very nice. They're very friendly. They know how to run. So here I am, I'm in Boston. So I get to Boston and I decide I'm going to run the Boston Marathon every single year that I'm a resident. My co-residents, they said, oh, you're crazy. This was back in the day where residents, we had no work hour restrictions. I don't know if there's any other physicians in the audience, but you remember those days when there were no work hour restrictions. So we were working 120 hours a week. So how do you train for a marathon? But this is what I did. This is how I gained resilience. This is how I grounded myself. This is how I stayed focused. So that is how I found myself running the Boston Marathon in 2013. So I'm going to share a little bit with you about what happened on that day, because some really important things happened on April 15th in 2013. Do I have any Boston runners in here? Anyone ever run the marathon in Boston? So the marathon is a beautiful day. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it, but the whole city shuts down in Boston. It's a holiday. Everyone takes a day off of work to celebrate runners. And so all of us runners, we gather in this area that's exactly 26.2 miles outside the city of Boston. It's really funny. Now I've run the Boston a dozen or so times, but you all get on these buses in Copley Square. So Copley Square is in the center of the city of Boston. And so hundreds of yellow school buses line up because they have to get 30,000 runners to Hopkinton, Massachusetts, which is this tiny little town exactly 26.2 miles outside the city of Boston. And so all the runners get up there and they're really nervous, and all the novice runners, and they get on these buses, and these buses go 5 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles. The buses get about 18 miles away from the city, and all the runners suddenly realize oh my gosh, I have to run all the way back, right? There's no going back. The buses drop you off and there's no other way to get back. So actually where the buses drop you off are not at the starting line, but at porta potties, because you get out your door because all that pre-race anxiety, it does a number on the gut for those novice runners. So the race starts, all that to say, the race starts in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. And it's this beautiful little town. And then us runners, we all start there and we go a straight line back to Boston. And so this is what I was doing on this beautiful day. I was just out running this race. And there's this very famous phrase in Boston You can buy shirts that say right on Hereford, left on Boylston. So Boylston Street is the last street that you're running on. And as you run down Boylston, you see the finish line. It's right there. And you feel like a superstar because there's tens of thousands of people cheering for you. So this is where I was. I was at that sign, right on Hereford, left on Boylston, this signpost that says Hereford and Boylston. And that's when I heard explosions. Now, us runners, we had no idea what was happening. We all thought fireworks. And for us, they're celebrating us, because why wouldn't you celebrate us at the end of this race? And as we kind of kept running, it almost instantly became clear that something had gone horribly wrong as smoke starts to fill the air and people start screaming, and stampede of tens of thousands of spectators start running towards us, screaming things like bomb, gunman, sniper, attack. And so this is where I stop for a moment as, smoke is swirling and people are running by you. It literally is like a scene from a movie when everything's going in slow motion and for a moment everything is silence. And this is when I asked myself and I said, what am I going to do? I know that people are gravely wounded ahead of me, but everyone's going this way. It seems like it's very dangerous. Do I run towards it? Do I stand here paralyzed in fear? Or do I turn, and run the other way with the crowd? And so in that moment, which seemed like eternity at the time, but it was only a split second, I actually started going against the crowd, going towards this mass casualty event. And a police officer stopped me at that moment. A police officer actually grabbed my arm and they had their gun drawn. So the whole last part of the race, the whole last half mile, there are lots of police presence that are there. There's dozens of police already there because their normal job is to keep the really drunk people out of the street. The spectators get pretty rowdy drinking beer because the restaurants all pass out free beer along Boylston Street that day. So the police officers are supposed to keep the rowdy crowd out, out of the way of the runners. But this time, they all had their guns drawn and they were ready to shoot, They were ready to do what they had to do to take out the threat, whatever it was. And so this police officer, he grabbed my arm and he said, "Stop. Where are you going? You must stop." And I saw him later and I apologized for this, but I actually yelled at him. I yelled at a police officer and I said, "I'm a kid's doctor. You have to let me through." And I think that stunned him because he lowered his weapon and he dropped his arm and he let me go. And so I was trying to get to where the injured people were, and this Boylston Street, where the bombs happened and all the spectators were swarming and running the other way. I actually couldn't make much forward progress. It was too chaotic. So I turned down this little alley because I lived near the area and I knew the area very well. And I turned down this small alley and it went forward, and that alley dumped me out at what is now known as bomb scene number 2. So when I got to bomb scene number 2, I have this memory branded for the rest of my life. It'll always be there, as almost as if it was yesterday or even this morning that this happened. I remember looking down on the pavement, on the bloody pavement, and asking myself, how am I going to bring these people back from the dead? And so I went to work along with dozens of other first responders there that day, dozens of people sacrificing, risking their lives, calling to action. I went to work personally as fast as I could. So what do you do in that situation, You have nothing. We had no tools. We had no supplies. We had the shirts on our backs. So bomb scene number 2, interestingly, was right in front of a running store. And it had blown out the window. The large front window of this running store had been blasted through. And so through the shards of glass, we actually were able, a few of us, to go in and out of this running store and get stretchy things, because running stores have a lot of stretchy things in them. And hair bands, those stretchy bands, that you use for weight training and stuff, a lot of those. And so we went in and we got as much as we could to use as tourniquets to stop the bleeding, to tourniquet people's legs, to pack wounds with whatever we could, groin wounds, lower extremity wounds, chest wounds. And, you know, I don't even know how long we worked there. I cannot, I know I ended up back at my house around 8 p.m. that night. What happened between when the bomb went off at 3 p.m. and 8 p.m., it is all kind of a blur. But I do know that on that day, I ended up personally treating 4 people, and 3 of them did survive. And I will say, on that day, everyone that left that scene alive stayed alive. It was remarkable. 270 people needed emergency trauma care. It was a mass casualty, and everyone that left in an ambulance alive survived. And so it was a miraculous event. And so in the aftermath of this, I'm almost done because we have some questions, and I just wanted to share a little bit about some things that we learned, and some of the questions are going to touch on this. In the aftermath of this event, I actually was interviewed extensively by multiple media outlets that wanted to know what happened. What was it like? What did you see? What was that experience like? But all of the journalists and all of the people who were interviewing me, they all had the same question. Their question was why? Why did you do this? Why would anyone do this? Why? This was clearly a dangerous situation. There were clearly still people out there who were armed and dangerous. There were more bombs that actually didn't detonate that were supposed to detonate, right? Why would you run into that? That seems like not the best idea. And so their question was why? And I didn't have the right answer for a long time. I thought something was wrong with me. I was like, I don't know why I did that. I don't know. That's a good question. And, you know, it was bothering me for a while that I couldn't answer their question. But it dawned on me one day that they were asking the wrong question. I think the better question is how. How do we help people understand that actually courage is one of our first instincts, right? How do we help people understand that we do not necessarily have to view chaos and challenges as oppositional, but how can we use them? How can we change the framework to understand how we can be a positive influence, how we can do something to improve the human condition, right? How do we teach people that? How do we help people understand that? So then I went on to study that, and I can share some of that in the question and answer, but we'll get back to the dopamine for a second. And it's really cool because when we started studying the how, me and some researchers from Mass General teamed up to try to understand the how. How do people learn to do this? How do certain people respond in this way and certain another way? And actually what we found, the first thing we found was really cool. We put people after events where they were forced into an event where they had to respond to a disaster, or they did an act of altruism or kindness, or even were challenged. So they were challenged to something outside of their comfort zone. And when we put them in these special machines called fMRI machines, which look at functionality of the brain and what is being released in the brain, we looked at the amygdala, which historically is our fight or flight center, right, which tells us to fight or fly, right? And guess what the brain was releasing? Dopamine. Dopamine, it is so cool because dopamine is actually our reward neurotransmitter. Dopamine rewards us. When our brain is flooded with dopamine, we feel good. So actually, biologically, when we are courageous, right? When we are altruistic, when we challenge ourselves, when we do something to improve the human condition of someone around us, our brain is rewarding us, right? And this is, I think, very biologically important to understand the nuances of how to encourage people and how to train people and how to help people understand that we are actually wired not to be afraid. We are wired to be fearless. And how do we help people tap into that and understand that, I think, is right the next step to some of the research and some questions that we have. So I think I might have gone over my time. I was supposed to spend like 10 minutes talking to you guys about my story. But we can now open it up for questions for the Q&A.
All right, so get
Oh,
ready.
no, thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, so I'm going to moderate these, and I think we've got, so there you go. So there is a number that will go to my cell phone. So if you see me looking at my cell phone, it's because we're asking you to text in questions. So you can text in questions, and I have some from the team at Baptist that Allison wanted me to ask as well. So we're going to throw in those and your questions and my questions, and we're just going to have a fun evening. So one of the things that I heard you talking about out there that I thought was really interesting is the system. So when you talk about that level of a traumatic incident, and obviously what you experienced triaging out, but then the system to be able to take care of them. And like you mentioned, everyone who was alive stayed alive. Share a little bit of what that was like, especially as a healthcare professional on your end.
Yeah, so systems are so important when it comes to responding to situations. I would say one of the biggest things is communication, right? A system that can communicate effectively with each other. And I'll give you an example. So it is every level of the system needs to communicate. So at Mass General, right? So they opened up all their trauma base. So Mass General is a massive adult hospital in Boston, and they are a level 1 trauma center. So a lot of the patients, dozens and dozens of patients went there. And every level of the system had to communicate effectively, from the trauma surgeons all the way down to the staff who were cleaning the trauma bays, right? So you have to value every single member of your system. And you have to understand that every single member of your system, whether you're a CEO, a physician, an ancillary staff, or a level of the system responsible for things such as cleaning the trauma bays, right? Mopping up the blood. Who cleans that up? Like every level of the system, no matter how small or nuanced, is important. And so what we found is that hospital systems who valued every level of the functionality of that system did very well. And they were able to not only triage the wounded, but rapidly clean the trauma bays and rapidly move on. And it just really showed how the communication between systems and between parts of the multidisciplinary teams were so important.
One of the other things that was interesting is you and I were talking about just military, and you work a lot with military in San Diego. How do you feel that experience, when you talk about it forever etched in your mind, and yet what military experience on that end, kind of the empathy side, how has it transformed your way of interacting with those who serve?
Serve in the military. Yeah, so I live in San Diego right now, right? And we have I'm a pediatrician in San Diego, and we do have a large military population in San Diego, and they have experienced a lot of trauma. And but I do think trauma is universal, right? There's a lot of people who've experienced a lot of trauma in their lives. And one of the things we have to recognize is when that is happening and how it affects our community and our patients, and how can we support people who have experienced trauma, whether it's trauma in the military, trauma from adverse childhood experiences, trauma from social determinants of health, right, that affect communities. I think one of the most critical things is understanding your community as a system and understanding the trauma that that community may be experiencing, and then having systems in place that can help those communities through that trauma. The trauma from the military is another one, right? Having empathetic and compassionate systems that are able to recognize when parents are in distress, right? When something a parent has experienced is affecting their ability to care for their family. And so, that's one thing we try to do as our hospital system is recognize which members of our community are vulnerable to stressors and from prior traumas, and then how can we as a hospital system reach them.
You heard a little bit in the bio, but give us a little bit of what your day-to-day life is right now.
Well, so it depends. I do a lot of different things in my life. So I actually run a child advocacy center. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Child Advocacy Center. A Child Advocacy Center is a place where children who have experienced trauma come for care. So when I'm seeing patients, I'm only working with patients who have experienced significant trauma. And so I work closely with community partners to help children who have experienced trauma. When I'm not seeing patients, I'm either doing research. I do a lot of research on social determinants of health and biases in healthcare systems. So understanding where health disparities may exist in a healthcare system and disparities in outcomes for different patients. And then I also teach. So I am a program director for a part of pediatrics called Child Protection Pediatrics. I'm also a program director for the general pediatric residency, and I teach at the medical school. So I have a lot of different hats that I wear.
You're a wife and a mother as well. So
I also have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. She turned 6 on Tuesday. And if any of you are familiar with K-pop Demon Hunters, that is the theme of my birthday party for my 6-year-olds.
do either of them run?
Well, only when they're running away from me.
All right. So we'll start weaving some of these questions in because they relate actually. So you say we're wired to be fearless. Do you think all of the sociocultural things that play on or off of fear or being afraid rewires us?
So let me tell you what I know about the brain and brain wiring. Caveat being, I am not a neuroscientist. However, we have done some research on how brains are wired and what's going on in people's brains. So I'm going to share with you a study, if that's okay. It's very sciencey, but I'll try to make it less sciencey. I need to stand up for this because it involves movement. Okay. So a study that we've been working on for many, many years now involves 3 different groups of people. We wanted to understand, why are some people afraid? And if it's okay to be afraid, right? No judgment passed on any of these people. But why do some people respond to certain things in a different way? We were mainly looking at first responders. So people who chose to respond to mass casualties, to respond to natural disasters, right? Things that happen where other people need help. And so we started looking at groups of people, and we had a cohort of 3 different groups of people that we've been looking at, and we've been studying longitudinally, looking at their brains and trying to figure out neurochemically and neurobiologically what happens in people's brains. So the first group of people over here that we studied were people who chose to be first responders. So we studied firefighters, we studied people like the people they jump in the ocean and save people. Coast Guard. I know, don't say National Guard. Okay, Coast Guard. We study the Coast Guard people and people who choose to do this in their professional lives. And then we had a group of people here who chose to be or found themselves being a first responder kind of by accident. They weren't trained to do so, but they made a choice when a natural disaster happened or a mass casualty event happened or something happened. They had made a choice to run into it and provide care of some sort. And then we found a whole group of people who self-identified as never having done that, nor would they. They said, actually, we would be the people who would probably run the other way. And again, no judgment across any of these groups. I'm just kind of describing the differences in these groups. So then we looked at everyone's brains and we studied connectivity between different parts of the brain. So we studied the connectivity, so the neurotransmitters and the synapses and the amount of connections that were in different parts of people's brains. So interestingly, the 2 parts of the brain that seem to be responsible for taking action are the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that's responsible for higher decision-making, like executive functioning. Humans have the largest prefrontal cortex in all the mammalian species. And the amygdala then is that part I talked about, which is your fight or flight center. So we found that people in this group had the strongest, and we're talking about by billions of connections, the strongest connections and the most synapses between their prefrontal cortex and their amygdala. So architecturally, we saw their brains were really wired to have fast and rapid responses between the decision-making portion of our brain and the reactionary part of our brain. And so then we looked at these two groups. Which groups do you think had the architecture of the brain most similar to those who had chosen a career in being a first responder? It was this group. It was the second group. They were statistically significantly more likely to have a similar connectivity, a similar architecture and structure between their amygdala and their prefrontal cortex than this group way over here who said, nah, wouldn't do it, haven't done it, not interested in being a first responder. So then we asked, well, why? Like, were they born that way? What does this even mean? Does it mean anything? And so when we interviewed people, so first, why do you think this group had a lot of connections between these two parts of their brain? What do they do in their life? Right? They practice. Practice is the only way that we actually can build new neurotransmitters. Why do babies' brains grow so rapidly and they're growing new cells in their brains and babies' brains are expanding and expanding? It's because they're practicing things. We as adults kind of stop practicing new things, don't we? We kind of get set in our ways. We kind of get like, this is my path, and we stop practicing. So first responders, we kind of assumed that their brains look like it and they had these strong connections because they have to practice over and over and over and over again to know what they're doing. So the really interesting part of this study, at least the part that I find most fascinating, is when we interviewed this group of people who had found themselves in a situation where they became a first responder, not even when called upon, guess what they said? They said, we practice. They used the same word. They said, you know, we do in our everyday life, we do not wait for something catastrophic to happen. We look for opportunities on a daily basis to practice courage, to practice kindness, to practice going out of our way to improve the human condition. Now, again, hard to know exactly what all this means because science is complicated and there could be a lot of variables that affect this. But what we are thinking is these brains look similar because of the practice, because people who maybe have this thought process or this mindset where they're like, today I'm going to challenge myself on something simple, right? Today I'm going to go out of my way to do something that helps someone. Perhaps that practice in our everyday life is actually what continues to grow that connectivity between what historically is our center that is responsible for kind of taking action and the decision-making center in our brain that says, you're thinking about it, let's do it. And so the science maybe is telling us that if we set up systems and we encourage people and we train people in such a way to kind of practice in their everyday life, things that they're maybe uncomfortable with, things that are challenging for them, right? Finding ways to go out into the community, to volunteer, to like have bigger than self goals about the world around you, that does kind of maybe set your brain up to be one of those brains that is less driven by fear and more driven by, how can I help? What can I do? How can I be part of the solution? That was a really long, complicated answer to your,
Well, I like that you went
question.
like scientific, inspirational, logical, like academic, like you covered everything possible in one. That was good. Yeah. So I think this ties in then with the practice, and obviously you're going to talk about this tomorrow in the keynote, but how can leaders train themselves to respond with courage instead of fear?
Yeah.
Which ties in obviously to practice.
It does. I think in leadership positions, so what I say to my trainees, and what I have to give this like motivational spiel, just medically motivational, to new interns that are coming on before they go into their first day on the wards, right? So how do you motivate them to not be terrified of what's to come? Because medicine can be terrifying. And so what I say to them, which I think is applicable to a lot of different leadership positions. I said, you need to ground yourself in three concepts. You need to ground yourself in curiosity about the human condition, and curiosity about the world around you, and curiosity about what people are experiencing. You need to ground yourself in creativity, thinking about how to understand how to work with complex patient conditions, complex systems, and complex problems in a creative way. And then you need to ground yourself in being courageous, right? Knowing that you have the skills, knowing that you are able to do this, and finding ways to be able to succeed involves really not just your own courage, but tapping into the courage of other people around you and the teams, and being able to kind of bring people together. So I always say, if you really look at the world around you through the lens of creativity, curiosity, and courage, you're really able to find ways to succeed, because it allows you to understand the human condition, and it allows you to, through that lens, view life not as this oppositional force, which, let me tell you, life feels very challenging and oppositional sometimes. But if you kind of shift your perspective a little bit through these different lenses, you can kind of weed out the noise of what feels like opposition to your goals, and it grounds you in a way to find strength. And I think that kind of what I'd say to the interns, I think also can hold true for anyone in leadership positions.
This ties into this question: is what practices help you stay grounded and resilient when pressure is high?
Oh man, a lot of practices. So I find myself grounded in this theory called, I need to make sure that I have bigger than self goals. And let me tell you where I got this theory from, this grounding theory of bigger than self goals, realizing that I am just a small piece of a large world, and it's bigger than me. And so when I was in Boston, I was the medical director of this inner city running group called Soul Train. Have any of you guys ever heard of Soul Train? Have you guys ever heard of Girls on the Run? Okay, so Girls on the Run. So we modeled after Girls on the Run. So in inner city Boston, there's a lot of youth who we would identify as vulnerable youth, as youth who are high risk. You hate to put a label on something, but many of these youth are youth who've been in and out of the foster care system, youth who have failed out of traditional schools, youth who are in the juvenile detention system, and we gather these youth together and we run with them. And our whole goal is to allow them to heal through running. And we give them running shoes, and we're running mentors. And so the mantra of the success for Soul Train is, we are all here not for ourselves, but for everyone else. And we have bigger than self goals. And we teach everyone in Soul Train that your goal is not to get yourself across the finish line. Your goal is actually to get everyone else across the finish line. And it's a really powerful message for them. And I'll tell you, we have been following this group of kids for almost 15 years, these cohorts of children. So many of these children come from a school that on the street they call the School of Last Hope for children. And we've been looking at them, and the cohort of kids that join Soul Train versus the cohort that doesn't from this school system. The Soul Train group has a 90% high school graduation rate versus a 30% graduation rate for those who didn't join Soul Train. The children, we've been studying their medication. The average amount of medication that many of these teenagers are on when they join Soul Train are 4 medications. They're on anti-psych meds, they're on antidepressants, they're on ADHD meds, they're on sleep meds, they're over-medicated. We have been able to get the majority of them down to less than 2 meds after a year in Soul Train. So there's something truly profound, I think, about the combination of what they learn in Soul Train, I will say, transcends through many different aspects of their life. And so what grounded me in that is, and what keeps me grounded through Resilient, is understanding this bigger than self goals and that my goal is really to not only focus on myself and what I can do, but how do I encourage everyone else to fulfill their potential and to cross that finish line. And so it's a really cool organization, and it really taught me a lot being the medical director. Those teenagers, man, they ran me to the bone and they taught me a lot.
There's quite a few questions coming in around kids and ADHD and how do educational institutions educate students with ADHD. It's difficult for the students to be stationary for most of the day. And so the common theme is, what have you found, or what advice would you give? Obviously, running was a powerful vehicle for you, but when you're talking about working with youth and your kids that have ADHD, what are some tips or recommendations?
Yeah, there's definitely not one size fits all when it comes to ADHD. And I will say the educational system in its current state does not support neurodiversity very well, or neurodivergence very well. And so kids who are neurodivergent do tend to struggle in school systems. They're just not necessarily equipped, for a variety of different reasons, to work with neurodivergence. My son has very severe dyslexia, so I know this very well, trying to gone through the public school system and get him therapies for his severe dyslexia. So when it comes to something like ADHD, I think my take is it's usually a multifactorial approach for children. It is very, very true that some children need medication. It is just, it is what it is. So I would say my general strategy, and what I say as a pediatrician to someone who's dealing with this within a school system or at home, is understand that usually those children need a variety of different interventions. Activity is 1, 2, 3, and 4, keeping them active, keeping them in some sort of physical activity has been scientifically over and over again proven to reduce or symptoms of ADHD in the school setting. And so I always encourage physical activity before school, after school, during school if possible. My children now bike to school. It's only half a mile. They don't have to go far. They don't have to go 4 miles. But I definitely think that the science is telling us that running in particular is really powerful for ADHD, but so are other forms of activity.
Yeah, Donami, you can now say, like, I had to do 4 miles every single day. Like, you hear those, with your parents, like, come on, you actually did it.
I know, I did it, man. I did it. Rain or shine, snow or tornadoes. They sent me on a tornado once. They were like, it's just a warning.
You can outrun it.
It's gonna be fine. I'm like, there's a funnel cloud, Mom, right there. It's not a warning. Like, you'll be fine. Okay.
This one is from Cynthia. And so, as a program director for Child Protection Pediatrics, how do you mentor future medical professionals to embrace compassion and courage in their careers?
We have to embrace compassion. We cannot lose compassion for people and for the experience of people. And there's a lot of stigmatizing conditions out there in the world that medical professionals find it challenging to find compassion for. And so I tell people, you have to be critically mindful of how you're feeling. You have to have mindfulness. Like, you have to take an inventory of yourself frequently. And as clinicians, we are not very good at doing that. Taking a personal inventory of your own empathy, right? Your own compassion, and where you're feeling drained, and where you're feeling that you need help or support, and getting it. I think it's all about a team. I think it's all about having people you can trust. I think it's all about having people you can talk to, and support systems in place that can help identify. So we have a very good support system at the Child Advocacy Center that I work at. So I am also vulnerable to compassion fatigue, right? And vicarious trauma burnout, right? So we have a system in place in my team where if we are identifying that it's happening in one of us, we are actually told to leave. We send each other home. I usually go get a facial. That's my therapy. But having a system in place where you can have someone you trust to say, I am recognizing in you burnout, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, you need help, right? You need to take a break. I think that's something that's critically lacking, is surrounding us by people who are brave enough and courageous enough to look you in the eye and say, you need to take a break. You need help. You need someone, you need to step away for a second. And then for us as clinicians who deal day in and day out with trauma, to be able to say, you're right, I do need a reset. And so I think that's a critical skill set that people need to have, is build support systems around them that can help them recognize when they need a break and when they need to step back, and then having the courage to be able to do so.
Yeah. Let's end it with this one. And then for those who want to stick around and take pictures, we can do some of those afterward. We'll probably do them up on the top ledge there. But if you could leave us with one message about leadership in times of uncertainty, what would it be?
When hasn't there been a time of uncertainty? I don't know.
I saw a
Oh my
message the other day where it's like, I would like to live in precedented times.
I know, precedented times. Why are these always
Everything is
unprecedented
unprecedented
times?
times.
I'm like, oh my gosh. So I would say, again, I kind of go back to the concept of understanding courage and having the courage as a leader to be able to not like the fear and courage, right? Balance between being afraid to do something and being courageous to do something. So I do see a lot of leaders act in fear, and I do see a lot of leaders act with courage. And so I think for leadership is asking yourself, what does courage look like? And how do I help my teams bring out that part of themselves? And that can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. But I also do truly believe that if leaders carry this concept of like, it's not about me, this bigger than self goal, it's about the community, it's about the needs of the community, it's about the needs of the employees, it's about the needs of the patients. If you can really kind of like understand, like work with that, I think that helps you stay grounded as a leader, what your North Star is. Because especially in healthcare, your North Star is your community, right? Your North Star is really the needs of the community, not your needs as a leader, right? But the needs of the community. So I find that leaders that really value the input of a community, and they have voices from the community, and they understand and they're able to integrate those into their leadership strategies, really leads to success of systems, especially healthcare systems.
Awesome. Let's give Dr. Stavas a round of applause. So thank you to Baptist Memorial Healthcare for hosting. We appreciate it. You all have been literal partners, since the very beginning of City Current. So we appreciate you. So we'll stick around. And if anybody would like to do pictures, Andrew, where would you like to do them? Would you down here or up there? We'll just do them down here.
Flowers are pretty.
Yeah, the flowers
Let's
are pretty.
use these flowers.
So
right?
we will use these
Before they
beautiful
die.
flowers as a backdrop. So if you would like a picture, come on down. We'll take some pictures and we'll wrap up. But thank you everybody for coming out. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.